Today, I wanted to talk about the power of the heart and mind. So this is a really special message to me because I kind of live by this message in a way. It's like kind of my core beliefs when it comes to being a Christian is the power of the heart and mind, and what we let in always comes back out. So I want to ask you all this morning, before I get started, who here has a friend? Yeah, there we go. Hopefully everyone should have a friend. Yeah, we all have a friend. Yep, Joan, there you go. Now, who here has a friend who is just always happy? No? Yes. We should all be that friend. Yes, we should all be that friend. But who here has a friend that is kind of always happy, always joyful? Now, let me ask you, do you enjoy being around that person? Yes, you do. Now, why? Because they're always happy, they're always joyful, and they bring that environment, they bring that atmosphere of happiness and joyfulness. So, today I'm going to be making the recurring point of what we let in always comes back out. And I want you guys to say it with me. What we let in always comes back out. I just kicked out my water bottle. One more time. What we let in always comes back out. All right. If you're taking notes today, I'm going to be breaking my message down into 3 main points. So the first point is, are you filtering the influence of the world? Are you filtering the influence of the world? There's a quote I have here that I've been trying to find for a while. It's by a motivational speaker over in the States called Jim Rohn. And the quote goes like this. It goes, "You are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with." You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. What we let in always comes back out. All right, we're going to turn to 1 Kings 12, 1-15, if you have your Bibles on you. And it reads like this. "Then Rehoboam went to Shechem because all Israel had come to Shechem to make him king. Now when Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, heard about this, he was living in Egypt, for he was still in Egypt, where he had fled from the presence of King Solomon. Then they sent word and summoned him, and Jeroboam and all the assembly of Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam, saying, 'Your father made our yoke hard, but now lighten our hard labor imposed by your father and his heavy yoke, which he put on us, and we will serve you.' Then he said to them, 'Depart for 3 days, then return to me.' So the people departed." In verse 6, it says, "And King Rehoboam consulted with the elders who had served his father King Solomon while he was still alive, saying, 'How do you advise me to answer these people?' So King Solomon had passed. He was the ruler of Israel up until he had passed, and then Rehoboam stepped up to take on the leadership of the nation of Israel. And Rehoboam went to the assembly of elders, which is basically like the parliament, the Congress of the time, the elders of Israel, and he asked them, he said, "How do you think I should respond to these people?" See, the people of Israel had been given a pretty tough time by King Solomon. So they came to Rehoboam asking him, "Hey, do you mind just kind of easing it off a bit? You know, give us a bit of a, just chill, you know, kind of ease off a bit because your dad's given us a pretty rough time." So then Rehoboam goes to the elders, goes to the parliament, and he asks them this. He says, "Then they spoke to him saying, 'If you will be a servant to this people today and will serve them and grant them their request and speak pleasant words to them, then they will be your servants always.'" So they basically tell Rehoboam, the parliament, the elders, tell Rehoboam, grant them their wish, ease off a bit, be nice to them, and they will serve you happily. So then it says in verse 8, "But he ignored the advice of the elders which they had given him and consulted with the young men who had grown up and served him, and grown up with him and served him. He then said to them, 'What advice do you give, so that we may answer these people who have spoken to me, saying, lighten the yoke which your father put on us?' And the young men who had grown up with him spoke to him, saying, 'This is what you should say to these people who have spoken to you. Say, your father made our yoke heavy, now you make it lighter for us.' You should speak this way to them. My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. Now then, my father loaded you with a heavy yoke, yet I will add to your yoke. My father disciplines you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions." It then says in verse 12, "Then Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam on the third day, just as the king had directed, saying, 'Return to me on the third day.' And the king answered the people harshly, for he ignored the advice of the elders which they had given him, and he spoke to them according to the advice of the young men, saying, 'My father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions.'" See, Rehoboam took on the advice of his friends rather than the advice of the elders. He took on the advice of the people who he had grown up with, these kids probably around my age, who I can almost guarantee you had no idea how to run a nation. I mean, I don't know how to run a nation. I can't imagine a group of kids my age knowing how to run a nation, especially in that time. What we let in always comes back out. See, they gave him bad advice and he took it on board when he had the option to take on the advice of the elders. He was negatively influenced by his friends. It says in verse 16, "When all of Israel saw that the king had not listened to them, the people replied to the king, saying, 'What share do we have in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, Israel. Now look after your own house, David.'" So see, this verse is interesting because the decision that Rehoboam made to take on the advice of his friends rather than the elders resulted in Israel revolting against not only him, but David. David had no involvement in this whole situation, no involvement in this whole scenario, but because of the negative influence that Rehoboam had from his friends, causing him to make this choice, this decision to bear down harder on Israel, it not only negatively impacted him, but also David, who had nothing to do with the whole situation. See, we need to not allow ourselves to be negatively impacted by our environment, by our world, by our friends, by our workplace. Who we choose to influence us is critical to the path we are set on in life. What we let in always comes back out. See, we are not only influenced by our friends' church, but we're influenced by movies, books, TV shows, the news, social media. The list goes on. And we're in a world now where it's become so sexualized and so toxic that we really need to be careful as to what we let into our hearts and into our minds. Our phone especially is such a dangerous place. I don't know about you guys, but I don't really watch the news as much as I used to because I would find myself feeling so down in the dumps because it's all negative. It is. It's all negative. And I would walk away from watching the news not feeling the best. So I want you to analyze what you're letting into your hearts and your minds today, church. And is it positive or is it negative? What we let in always comes back out. Say it with me. What we let in always comes back out. Always comes back out. And it says in the Bible that the devil preys on the weak. It says in 1 Peter 5:8, it says, "Be of sober spirit, be on alert. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking to devour." The devil prowls around, church, trying to devour us. He lays out bait in the form of temptation, trying to devour us, trying to prey on the weak. So, church, we need to be ready when the devil comes with temptation. We need to be of strong heart and mind. Okay, point 2, if you're taking notes, the strengthening of our heart and mind. We're going to be reading from Proverbs 4:20 to 27 if you want to turn there. Strengthening of our heart and mind. All right. Proverbs 4:20. I'm going to read on from there. It says, "My son, pay attention to my words. Incline your ear to my sayings. They are not to escape from your sight. Keep them in the midst of your heart. For they are life to those who find them and healing to all their body. Watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. Rid yourself of a deceitful mouth and keep devious speech far from you. Let your eyes look directly ahead and let your gaze be fixed straight in front of you. Watch the path of your feet and all your ways will be established. Do not turn to the right or to the left. Turn your foot from evil. So I kind of want to break down this verse into three different parts. It says at the start, it says, "My son, pay attention to my words. Incline your ear to my sayings. They are not to escape from your sight. Keep them in the midst of your heart." So church, the first step to finding growth is allowing God to speak to us. The first step in finding growth in our heart and in our mind and in our walk with God is allowing Him to speak to us. See, church, this can be done through prayer, through reading our Bible, or just through time spent praising Him, just time spent in His presence. Time spent in His presence. And one thing that I love about God's character is that He's just as happy when, in that split second when we wake up in the morning saying, "Hey God," He's just as happy then than what He is when we spend, hours praying to Him. I just love that about God's character. But see, this doesn't mean you should stop praying to Him for hours a day. But I just want you guys to understand how much God loves you and how happy He is when you speak to Him and allow Him to speak to you. Part 2, when I break down a second part of this verse, it says, where are we? Watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. Watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. Hey, church, we need to also take time to guard our heart because our heart is so precious. See, church, it says, watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. But the springs of life, church, can only flow from our heart if we allow the springs of life to flow into our heart. Okay, I'm going to break down the third part of this verse. It says, where are we? Let your eyes look directly ahead and let your gaze be fixed straight in front of you. Watch the path of your feet and all your ways will be established. Do not turn to the right or to the left. Turn your foot on evil. Just like that quote that I said at the very start, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. See, this verse capitalizes on the importance of the people you surround yourself with. See, church, we need to have people in our lives that keep our vision fixed straight on God, that keep our feet on the path of God. As many of you would know, I was earlier in the year baptized, re-baptized again. And some of you may know, but I have actually, up until that point, for many, many years, quite heavily struggled with a porn addiction. That has been something that I've struggled with for many years, from when I was just a little kid up until even the start of the year when I was re-baptized. But the change didn't happen for me when I got re-baptized. The change happened when I made the decision that day to open up about it and to get a group of people around me that I'm able to talk to about the issue and that can keep me accountable and keep my vision fixed in the right way. And because of that choice and that decision and getting the people around me, getting a network of people around me that keep me accountable, I have seen incredible growth in myself, in my heart and in my mind, and in my Christian walk with God. See, church, we need to keep people in our lives that keep our eyes fixed on God and that keep our feet on the right path. People that can keep you accountable, church. So, how can we strengthen our heart and mind? 1, allow God to speak to us. 2, spend time reading His Word. 3, surround yourself with people who can keep you accountable. With strength comes wisdom, church. Wisdom to see the temptation and to walk away. It says in Genesis 39, 6-23, this is the story of Joseph fleeing from temptation. Many of you may know it. It says, "Now Joseph was in handsome form and appearance, And it came about after these events that his master's wife had her eyes on Joseph. And she said, "Sleep with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Look, with me here, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house, and he has put me in charge of all that he owns. There is no one greater in this house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do this great evil and sin against God?" It then says in verse 12, "So she grabbed him by the garment, saying, 'Sleep with me.' But he left his garment in her hand. But he left his garment in her hand and fled and went outside." The church, the final answer to the question, how can we strengthen our heart and our mind, is run. Run. Flee from temptation just as Joseph did. See, church, we need to be able to remove ourselves from a situation of temptation. And it sounds easier than it is. It's incredibly hard. But when we build up our strength in our heart and our mind, it becomes so much easier. And we spend time with God. See, church, we need to get to the point in our Christian walk where we're almost predicting temptation, if you know what I mean. When you're going into your workplace or you're at home and what I've noticed is that temptation sometimes tends to come in patterns. So we need to be able to get to the point where we are predicting temptation and thinking in advance so we don't fall. And that can be there with people who suffer from drug addiction and alcohol addiction. I've talked to some people that have experienced that sort of thing, and they have certain areas and certain locations that they go to that trigger them. Or whether it's certain sounds or a certain image, there are triggers. So we need to get to the point where we are predicting temptation and thinking in advance so we don't fall, avoiding the temptation before it's even there. And with that, starts with seeking wisdom from God and growing strength in our heart and mind. Because with strength comes wisdom. And church, you aren't going to see change in yourself if you don't just take the first step and surround yourself and create that network and that environment of people that can keep you accountable and people that make sure you're on the right path looking at God. So, point 3, what are you doing to be a positive influence and light in the people's lives around you? We're going to be reading from Galatians 6, 1-2, if you want to turn there. It says, brothers and sisters, even if a person is caught in any wrongdoing, you who are spiritual are to restore such a person in a spirit of gentleness, each one looking to yourself, so that you are not tempted as well. Bear one another's burdens and thereby fulfill the law of Christ. See, I love this verse because it is clear as day, tells us how to be a positive influence and a light in people's lives. It says, show a spirit of gentleness, bear one another's burdens. So quite basically, just be there for people, church. That's how we can be a light. Strengthen by, be an ear that will listen and be a mouth that will support. Because I feel like so often we just want to fix everyone's problems and fix everyone's issues, when the best thing we can do is just listen and show that support and be there for someone. Bear their burden with them. Show a spirit of gentleness. But see, I just want to go back up to the start of this verse. It says, you who are spiritual are to restore. See, so often we want to help people before we've helped ourselves. And that is where the damage is done, in misguided support of others. See, we need to be of strengthened heart and mind before we invest ourselves in other people. We need to be strong in our heart and our mind before we invest our time and our ears in other people. Because if we're trying to support and fix people and change people, well, not change people, but if we're trying to help someone with their issues when we're struggling with the same thing, I feel like with that comes misguided support. I have a bit of a testimony actually that kind of applies to this point. For many of you who know, I'm a support care worker for Darren's company, and I recently started with a new client. This was a couple weeks ago, and I started work with a new client, and basically from the get-go, he told me that he was gay. Straight away, off the bat. I was like, hey, how are you? He was like, hey, my name's this, and I'm gay. I was like, okay, cool. Didn't really think too much of it, but later in the day, we had to kind of go out and do these jobs and stuff, and we're driving in the car, and many of you know, well, some of you know, I love music, and I'm always driving, kind of listening to music in the car, and we were listening to music in the car, and we're kind of just cruising along, going out to do these jobs and stuff, and he turns down the music, and I'm like, what are you doing? He turns off the music, and then he looks at me, and he goes, and he just starts talking about how he used to go to a Catholic church and how he had some kind of negative experiences at that church, and he just started talking about God. Now, I want you to keep in mind, I didn't mention God at all while I'm with him. I didn't bring up church. I didn't bring up anything. I didn't even tell him that I was a Christian. But we're just driving along, and all of a sudden he turns down me music, and he starts talking about how he used to go to a Catholic church and about God. And in that moment, I asked him, and I was given the opportunity to pray with him. And so we're driving along. No music is on the radio, and I was able to pray for him. And I feel like that's just such an incredible moment and an example of if we're a light, if we walk around in our daily life being a light of God, it draws people to us. And it makes people see that client of mine was comfortable enough with me. On the first day that I had met him, he was comfortable enough with me that he felt comfortable to open up about the hurts that he had experienced at this Catholic, I don't recall if it was a church or school, but at the hurts of his past. He was comfortable with me to open up about the hurts of his past and to talk about God straight off the bat. He felt comfortable enough with me to open up. And see, church, that shows the importance of being a light in people's lives. It says in Matthew, it says, you are the light of the world, church. You are the light of the world. So, in reflection, what we let in always comes back out. We need to surround ourselves with people who can keep us accountable and align our vision. With strength comes wisdom, church. And see, church, we need to spend time daily strengthening our heart and our mind through allowing God to speak to us. And lastly, be a positive light and influence in the people's lives around us.